Hey, welcome everyone. Thank you for being here and for joining what I cannot believe is the June webinar for the Ohio Workforce Coalition. For those of you new to us, the Ohio Workforce Coalition was founded nearly 20 years ago to bring together leaders from education and training, economic and workforce development, business and industry, labor, human services, everyone to work together to advance policies and practices that grow the training and supports available to workers, improve the quality of jobs and access to good jobs, and to build the transparency and equity and accountability of our public workforce systems, especially around data. Our work is done through networks, and we have a wide range of members and partners on today's call. We do encourage you to be introducing yourself in the chat and make sure that you say hi, answer questions, ask questions, but really engage in the chat. Our webinars are on the the fourth Thursday of each month. And if you are not a member, we do have recordings available to members only. Encourage you to take a look. I'll drop our membership link into the chat in just a moment, but uh, please consider joining. Again, we've got some members on. We come to our members first for meetings with public officials, for webinar ideas, for policy advocacy efforts, and so on. So take a look at that, and if you're able to, join the coalition. And with that, I'm going to introduce our guest today. Jeran is the Senior Manager of Business Leaders United at the National Skills Coalition. She's also a neighboring Michigan resident, so she's a fellow Midwesterner. Blue is a national business network comprised of leaders from small and medium-sized businesses from across the country, and they represent a wide range of industry sectors who are thinking about, worried about working on mismatches across the country and promoting public investments in skills training and education that really can prepare America's workers in the 21st century. Jeran manages the implementation and engagement of these members, as well as works on expanding the Blue Network. Before joining NSC, Jeran worked as a senior policy associate at Advanced CTE, which supports state CTE leaders as they're advancing high quality, equitable CTE policies, programs, and pathways. And in that role, she managed two sites under the JP Morgan Chase New Skills Ready Network grant, which supports sites in developing equitable, high quality career pathways. She has served as the Education and Research Project Manager at Talent 2025, a systems level convener in West Michigan. As the Education Research Project Manager, she led that organization's work in education priorities from early childhood to post-secondary education. So nice to have someone who knows the early childhood kind of cradle to career continuum. And Jeran guided the convening of several education working groups that focused on policy priorities and advocacy opportunities to alleviate barriers and increase funding for students throughout their educational journey. So please welcome me in joining Jeran. And again, if you haven't introduced yourself yet in the chat, go ahead and introduce yourself. We will have time for question and answer at the end of today's session, but if you do have a question right off the top, go ahead and drop it in the chat. We will make sure to circle back with it. And with that, Jeran, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. So thankful to be here today. I'm working through a cold, so I do have my cough lozenge in my mouth right now, so apologize for that. But again, Jeran Culina, I am from the state north of y'all. I know we are not always best friends in this, but I hope that this is a good presentation for you. Won't put anything against me from being from Michigan. Um, we're going to talk a little bit about a report that my coworker, who I think you all know, Amanda Bergson-Shilcock, and myself undertook last year for almost all of the year, which was around learning more about what businesses are looking for in the hiring process and what that has to do with policy and advocacy. So The report was called Big Insights from Small Employers because most of the employers we talked to were small and mid-sized companies, which is what Blue is all about. And as you'll see, and as Rebecca alluded to, I work for National Skills and my work is all around business engagement. So typically we focus on small and mid-sized businesses, but I do have some corporate partners that are larger companies that I just help engage in conversation around like what they should be looking for in the workforce policy landscape as well, because there's many other things that are taking up their time right now, and just to have some other advocate beside them talking about workforce helps them as well. Um, Today we're gonna kind of go through a few different things, and it might seem like there's a lot, and there are a lot of slides which I'll be able to share afterwards, but if you know Amanda, you'll know that these slides go pretty quickly and they don't have a ton of stuff on them because we really want you to be thinking about how the context of this lands in your work as well. So we'll talk about what is the major things that we learned from the employers, why did we even do this study, what we learned, what that means for you. And then I added our worker voice research as well because I think there's some intertwining or there's some work that overlaps across what we learned in our worker voice versus what we learned in our business research that I think is important to remember that there can be still those interconnected policy recommendations as well, even though sometimes businesses and workers are pitted against each other, there are also things that they do agree on that we could move forward as well. So what are the major takeaways for you? So if you leave learning nothing but this, I'll be happy with that. Um, because these are the really things that I think are the most important to be thinking about. Small businesses really talked about technical assistance because the capacity and time that they have is there's just not a lot of it because you often talk about your HR manager being your financial person, being your legal person, being your sometimes manager. And so they're overseeing quite a number of things when you're talking about companies, especially companies under the size of 200. Lots of that were under the size of 50 as well. So they want somebody to be really helping them through the process, whether that looks like an intermediary, whether that's a community college, whether that's a workforce partner, somebody that's providing that technical assistance to them. They also value, and this is probably not new to you, but education and workforce partners who put in that shoe leather. And what they mean is just like really helping them understand what are the skills that are necessary for each job, and how do we make it easier to collaborate on things. Uh, and I talked to Rebecca ahead of this, but that's actually what we're learning a lot in our new Promise of Work campaign, which is all around re-envisioning the workforce system. So in my over like 100 calls with businesses, that's another thing that was brought up is just like, how do we make it easier for businesses to collaborate? And I often bring up this research study that was done in the state of Washington, which is around like businesses have almost like close to 800 touch points in a year from education and workforce systems that they're trying to navigate. So just like making things a little bit more streamlined for them. Um, and then the big takeaway from both the business and worker research was that increasing access to work-based learning is key for both sides of the house. So businesses really were interested in this conversation about work experience. And I think it's often something we hear is that like businesses value work experience. Well, like how do we get that for them if they're saying that they need 2 to 3 years on an entry-level position? And the other thing is like workers want programs that have experiential learning in some capacity. So just those two things being really intertwined of like businesses want more work experience ahead of entry level jobs, and then workers also want that as well. So why did we do this study? We were really curious about how small businesses were talking about hiring, especially as it was related to like credentials in these conversations we're having around credentials. Um, because at the same time, we're really talking about, we were looking at this state effort around quality non-degree credentials. So how is that landing with businesses at the same time? As well as we're talking about we were in a system of skills first hiring being something really important to the conversation both nationally and a state level. But was it really landing with businesses? Because I think the question is often like, skills-based hiring is happening, but where is it happening? Is it happening in large employers? Is it happening in small employers? So we were just kind of trying to get a better sense of what was happening across both of those two landscapes. And also at the same time, we're talking about we started this study last year, obviously new administration, um, tariffs being a really strong conversation at the time, uncertain landscape of hiring. Um, and yet we found that employers were really willing to talk to us. And they were actually really eager that we talked. We asked the conversation about like, what do you need? What are you seeing in your hiring process? All of those questions that we'll talk about later, but they were really eager to talk to us, and we probably could have had more than these 75 conversations, but that's where we landed was around 75 small and mid-sized businesses from across the country. Um, and it was like the very range of employers, but most of them had somewhere between 200 to 600 employees. But we did talk to companies that had 10 employees. So this was like across a very diverse range of small and mid-sized companies. And they were located across 40 states. But I will be able to share something about other states too, because we're talking to almost all of the 50 states in our new promise of work conversations with businesses too. We focus specifically on manufacturing and construction, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. But we also spoke with mostly senior management. So it could be the CEO, the president, the CHRO, or just the lead senior HR director, or somebody that was in that equivalent role. We chose those industries specifically because at the time that we were having this conversation, there was a widespread presence of all of those things across the United States. All of them were hiring at the time. I know that's kind of shifted over the last year and a half. But those industries were the middle ground for us. Like they were really the ones that would be using credentials as either a proxy for understanding skills or like as a career pathway of things that they might need to get as they moved up the ladder. Um, which is different than other industries like maybe hospitality where there's less credentials used in that space or healthcare, which is a little bit more regulated in the licensing and the credentials that are needed to get into positions.
So, Jeran, there's a
So,
question about the
oh
list
yeah.
of just the list of companies. Is that something that that is published in the report? I can't remember.
No, we promise anonymity to the employers. There are a couple of employers that are quoted in the actual study, but we didn't even take AI notes. We like really made it so that we took fun handwritten notes of or computer generated notes on our own part to make sure that the employers felt like they could be candid in the conversation. And to be fair, it actually produced probably better results for us because we were able to have them be like very open, which you'll hear about in the turnover conversations, which were a little bit wild to us. Um, But yeah, so unfortunately, no, we aren't with either that one or even our new promise of work one too.
That makes sense. Can you give us have there been companies in Ohio, I'm assuming? Good represent.
Yes,
Okay,
actually several
good.
companies in the state of
Love to hear it.
Ohio.
Thanks.
Yeah. So, and please also continue to stop me in things so that I can describe things as well. So two broad categories of what we learned, and then I'll go deeper into like both of those things. First one, what do businesses want policymakers to do? So we'll talk a little bit about the policies that got brought up because one of the questions we asked was, okay, so if you had a scenario where you were able to talk to a policymaker and you said, this is the most important thing you should know right now, or this is the most important thing you should be dealing with right now, they gave us some really candid feedback that I think is likely from knowing Rebecca and the stuff you guys work on, aligned to some of the things that you guys are really wanting to push forward, including things around supportive services and childcare too, which I thought was interesting in the fact that we don't often see businesses be really candid about the fact that that's something important to be removing barriers, but those were things that came up. And you guys can use why that's important is because you guys can think about that as like, okay, this is just the foundation. And obviously I can vet this with employers in the state of Ohio more broadly, but it really gives a foundation of saying like this is the starting point for bridging those conversations between small businesses and talking about policy and advocacy to see if those things land with them as well. The other part was around just like there was a grouping of employers, probably like 20% of the employers that we talked to that we call, actually we don't call, they called themselves employers of choice. Um, and we'll talk about that's really referencing job quality. Honestly, they just didn't use the word job quality. But those leading small businesses had very common things that they were doing. So we'll talk about why those things are important for workforce stakeholders to use as like a piece of informing the outreach or the work that you guys are doing to make sure you're really maybe starting with those employers of choice or how to determine who those are. And I'll talk about those things in just a minute. So the business leaders really talked to us about, like I said, they were very candid about how education and workforce leaders, as well as state policymakers, could be supportive of the things that they were trying to accomplish as business leaders in the space of workforce specifically. The first thing that they mentioned, and I really hope this aligns with what everybody wants, is that there just needs to be more funding for skill building, and it just has to be easier to access. And this is not new to any workforce stakeholder that we all know that things are not in just one general place for you to find out where the information is about how you get more money for skills training. So making sure that those opportunities are both expanded, but also are in a place that is probably easier for businesses to get the information because right now they just are looking maybe at a labor section or Department of Workforce or whoever it is, and not looking that like education has all of these things and maybe HHS has these kind of things. So they don't see all of those other avenues of where they could use some skill building funds. Um, and so just make more funding and making it easier to access. And then, I mean, we already kind of talked about the fact that there is real importance in having opportunities to get hands-on experience and employers were really obviously stressing the fact that they would love to have some kind of work experience, whatever that looks like. However, I do think that there is a case still to be made to employers around return on investment for work-based learning and as the very broadest continuum of what work-based learning is. I think they understand certain components of that, but you and me both know that there's opportunities to share more about pre-apprenticeship programs, externships, practicums, co-ops, all of those things that also get the right information, but employers may not know the terminology that goes along with it or why it's important for them to know about those types of programs because when they're seeing this on the resume, it might not resonate as much as it does for you and myself because we know these words and we know, hopefully, the standards that go alongside of those. Understanding that every stakeholder has different standards, um, but hopefully a little bit more similar than for employers to better understand. I think one interesting point that we learned and I wrote a blog on recently was that employers really were having this they were mostly promoting folks that were good at a specific task. So like a CNC operator who is really effective at being that CNC operator. Well, if they're good at that, we should just put them as a leader or a manager. And that often led to retention issues because that person wasn't trained to be a leader or manager. However, they found it tricky to understand how they could maybe get some investment or some funding around upskilling their first line supervisors. Um, so we put in there that it's a good opportunity to shape outreach to small businesses around I know the importance of adult education and I know what adult education does, but I'm not sure always employers know or understand the importance of things like adult education, workforce development, training programs, community college options for upskilling their employees. And this is not new to anybody here, but I'm just reinforcing that there is a very large landscape of credentials and our probably largest finding in this is that businesses that had really good partnerships with their community college system, with their workforce board, were the ones that were using the credentials that were coming out of those programs because they understood what the skills were that were associated with it. The only other time that they were really confident on credentials was if it was like a national credential, like maybe an AWS certification. Other than that, they found it really time consuming to try to figure out what the skills were attached to the credential that that person was bringing. So often they were also just um, assessing the skills too, if that person got in front of the hiring manager. So the biggest issue was like that sometimes they weren't even passing whoever was looking through the resumes because that person wasn't willing to like go deeper into seeing like are those skills connected to the needs that I have or the skills that we are looking for. Um, so more opportunities for smaller businesses to be involved in co-creation or development of credentials, whether that is through ISPs like I know Ohio is very good at, or whether there's other opportunities that focus on that the fact that businesses don't have a ton of capacity to be doing this work. And then, while this is a trickier statement, we also think there is some importance in like how do we teach our students how to name the skills that they got in on their resume so that there's a little bit more validation that like these are the skills that were associated with that credential. I know that's a little bit of a trickier statement because we're not sure how much they're looking into resumes or using AI to check those resumes. Um, and then something that we think is super important, and I know the state does, is that there has to be more opportunities to have something like an industry sector partnership so that there's more funding for those because the more opportunities to bring small and mid-sized voice and not just like very large companies into the conversation when most of the landscape of the country, including I know the state of Ohio and the state of Michigan, are smaller businesses. We want to make sure that they have the ability to put some time into something that's important in vetting some of those credentials or whatever curriculum or any of those things where they get more face time in front of you all, nonprofits, community colleges, workforce training providers. Um, in any way we can invest as a state to expand the technical assistance that's needed to serve those smaller businesses. Um, I know there's really good bright spots around the country of chambers, workforce boards, the community colleges supporting the smaller employers to better understand the skills that they need. So they're not just asking for bachelor's degrees as a proxy to cut out certain populations of people because they're thinking like, well, if somebody could keep up with a degree or all of those kind of things, and we know that they have the right soft skills to enter into our business. If there's just somebody that just helps them navigate understanding the skills and creating more of that skills first model of hiring, that's kind of what businesses were hoping for, just like more capacity to be able to do those kind of things so that they could hire more diverse populations. Okay, so then the second part, so shifting away from the policy side of things and shifting more towards the section on employers of choice. Um, this is where I really want to talk more about what we learned from that fact. So, reality was that when we went into these conversations, Amanda and I thought like we were going to see a normal bell curve of like there was going to be really great employers, there was going to be employers not doing anything, and then most of them would be in that landscape of like right in the middle, and it's it was really like a more shift of like there's this 20% of employers that are doing a ton of work, and then a lot of them are being left behind because they maybe don't know that the other employers are doing that work. They don't know how to do that work. They don't have capacity to do that work. It's not to say that some of those companies didn't want to do that work. Most of them, when we told them about what other companies were doing, they were like, oh man, that's interesting. I wish I had whatever time and capacity to do it, more investment to do it. So, the important note is that I think they could use more workforce and education stakeholders, better understanding how to work in the limited capacity that they have to better serve them around like doing some of this employer of choice work. So, like I said, instead of using the words quality jobs, job quality, good jobs, good voice or worker voice, they often called themselves employers of choice because they wanted to be seen in the community as the one employer that somebody should go to because they know that that employer has a good record of doing good by their employees, having good feedback loops. And they saw that as a competitive advantage because they would be able to get to the talent faster than others in the community because people were talking about how good of an employer they were. And so, what did those businesses have? These are kind of the six things. I'll go through them pretty quickly to make sure that we have enough time for questions, but I'm happy to stop at any time if you guys have a specific question. First thing, the was job descriptions that had clearly defined skills and competencies. This really goes back to that skills first conversation, because these employers took the time to look through most, if not all, of the jobs to understand what skills were actually necessary to do the job instead of just putting a credential or a bachelor's degree as that proxy for the soft skills. They looked and saw like what are the technical and soft skills that we actually need for this job. They also had like very valued connections with their education and workforce systems. And it often was just like one of those bodies. Maybe it was the community college, the workforce board, maybe it was a nonprofit that they were very connected to, a training provider, but they had a very strong connection to whoever that person was. Um, they also collaborated with their industry peers and not just in a superficial way of like, I am, if the chambers are on here, I'm not trying to knock anything that your guys doing, but not like in a very higher level conversation around like where I say hiring is hard and you say hiring is hard, but what I mean is that hiring is hard because I live in a rural area and I'm looking for this really specific set of skills that are necessary for me to get the right person in, and I just don't, and we don't have a lot of capacity to have those people. Whereas, like, you're saying hiring is hard because you're just churning staff. So those like we might be thinking you're saying each other are saying the same thing, but we're really not going deeper to better understand what are the best practices that you could put in place, like these ones, with others, I'm sure, to be those employers of choice. Um, and I could maybe not go through one conversation without hearing the word soft skills, critical skills, any of those things that come up that you probably hear all the time as well. Um, However, these employers weren't talking about soft skills as just like, oh, these are things that we heard like, oh, those kids, they never come on time and they're always on their phones and they never put technology down. It's like, no, these were talking about, okay, you need communication skills because safety is our number one priority. And if you're not communicating across to other staff like that, you're not either going to come in to work that day or you're doing something that's maybe not safe, then that puts everybody else at risk. So they're connecting it to the values of the company instead of just like a flat, like kids these days kind of conversation. It was really connected to why their mission and values were important and those soft skills were put into place in that missions and values statement. Mhm. They had I think this is important too, is that they didn't talk about worker voice, but they did have a conversation about like we don't just let issues bubble. We don't just let issues just come, rise and rise and rise and rise until they like blow up. We have like this feedback loop where we're allowing our workers input into key issues and they have ability to talk across like like managers so that they better understand that even if an issue isn't solved by the direct manager, they have ways to get that information elevated to whoever the next person is. And then I think this is my favorite because I love a good early childhood conversation. But it wasn't, they weren't addressing workers as just workers. They were addressing workers as people that live lives outside of work as well, which I think is key in the conversation about work-life balances and things that are barriers to folks that they were trying to also address as well. Maybe not internally alone as an employer, but they were looking at like, okay, my favorite example is an employer locally here in Michigan that had a group of realized he had a pretty female population on his first shift, but they were always late to work. And he was like, "Well, I should ask them, what is the issue that's coming up that is a barrier for you? Because you cannot seem to clock in more than like 15 minutes late." Well, guess what? If you are a mom or dad, you understand that the line for school is long. And you often get backed up because you're trying to get your kid to school and or they're running late or however it is, and you're really far back in the line. He shifted the time 30 minutes, everybody's on time. So like just thinking about how can you resolve barriers for folks that maybe could be as easy as what he did, because it was easy for him. Um, but it could be things that are larger too, that you're just like engaging nonprofits that support you in that work too. So education and workforce providers can use these like six things, and I'm sure there's more to just see if there's companies that are better positioned to be the most effective partners to first involve in these conversations around workforce. So linked is the full report in the two-page summary. But I can also put it in the chat as well, Rebecca, if you don't have it in there too.
I can do that.
So okay, and last thing, I wanted to just a little bit talk about the worker voice and then we can go into some questions, but the worker voice had less people in them, um, but still brought like really important things that I think are that I'm sure you guys would value hearing about. Here's just the demographics of the folks that were in the groups. We had way more people than we thought we could hold. I think it was like 400 people, and we only had these 35 slots. So there were a lot of workers interested in telling us about their story, but we only had so much capacity to be able to interview all of these individuals. So my coworker Michael, who if you don't know is an amazing person, leads our worker voice strategy, was one of the people along with Amanda that interviewed all of these individuals. Um, so big findings here. The first is that even if people had not found jobs, they were they talked very highly about the experiences that they had because they understood the value on skills training as a path to this better job and this brighter future, regardless of if that at that current time they had that job based on the skills training, they were still very excited that they had that opportunity to be in that program. The other was that, again, probably no surprise to you, people chose the training programs because they were flexible, and most of them chose the program because it was free. So there's an importance in understanding that even if things didn't lead to these high wage jobs. They were just really looking at what could work around my work schedule and what was free for me to go into. Oh, and then there wasn't a ton of data for them to go off of. There wasn't like a website that you can go to that says like this training program is really effective and it gets these people the jobs, because there's not a ton of great state longitudinal data systems that showcase too in like very like dashboard friendly terms, like this is the program that's really effective. If you go into this program, then then you'll get this kind of payoff. Most of the people were just Googling or talking to relatives about programs that they had been through, and that's how they found the program that they ended up in. And a lot of it was like Google searches. Um, but again, the training programs were really great about offering helping gain the soft skills, building the confidence to be able to be in interviews with folks. Um, but they didn't lead to most of the folks in our 34, again, very small group, did not have jobs that were associated with the programs that they went through. Some of them were working in for the organization that trained them as like a temporary fix till they found the next step, which is great in helping them just build some confidence and some work experience, but not exactly aligned to the training program that they went through. Um, no surprise again, we'll talk about work-based learning being an important piece. And programs that had employer partnerships were important because they both built social capital for those individuals, but then they also were likely to be able to be employees for those employers because they had that connection point. So I think as I move through the last few slides, this one is just going to talk about what should you be doing with that information. Um, ensure people have access to the programs without having to pay lots up front or throughout the process. Again, people were looking for affordability and ease of access, so just being able to understand what programs give that to them, as well as understanding that they what programs are tied to jobs as they exit or careers as they think about the next months after leaving those programs. Um, any place that there could be more investments or opportunities to pay students to do earn and learn programs, especially in fields that aren't specifically known to have apprenticeships. So all of these non-traditional fields, even including in some of the caring professions, just being able to get more folks into those programs. Um, more opportunities to have strong connections with businesses so that uh not only that people get jobs after, but again, the social capital piece of the that was super important for these students to build when they may not have had all of that social capital building in the years prior to that program. Um, and I'm sure something that we all would love to see is more access to data that's accessible for all people, not just folks that can go through systems that we know how to navigate, but so that everybody knows how to navigate those systems. And I do think this is something that's important to both conversations is that the if without being able to remove barriers or continue to remove barriers as employment happens, I think we just lose out in just great categories of people that could have been good employees for the employers that are looking for workers. So I think that's all I got. So, yeah, I'll stop sharing so I can see what kind of questions y'all have for me.
Thank you. Well, as every time I hear you talk or have an opportunity to sit down with you, I find myself going, but what about this? And did you talk about that? And what do you think here? So
Please.
one thing that jumps out at me is when you talk about work-based learning, that is this giant umbrella.
So,
And I think workforce people, but also employers then start getting lost between internship, co-op, apprenticeship, pre-apprenticeship, all of these different work-based learning sorts of strategies. Did that bubble up a lot? And what do you recommend for workforce people as they're thinking about what's the best type of
no.
learn and earn sort of strategy?
I think because of the type of employers we were talking to, so manufacturing and construction, I think obviously apprenticeships rose to the top as like the priority, but mostly because of knowledge of of that type of structure because they
Hmm.
were thinking like somebody had gone through so many years of experience, they'd had a mentor, there was like industry knowledge. However, there's a lot of employers that don't love the structure of apprenticeships, largely because of like regulatory things, data paperwork, and as you saw, make things easier for employers is a key thing. And while I do think there's a strength in intermediaries supporting apprenticeship structures, I just don't think it's always the option for employers to do that. So I think while we understand that earn and learn is very important for workers, there has to just I think it's probably more, and this is not fair to workforce stakeholders, but there is some education awareness that has to be done for the employers by the workforce stakeholders and where we want to push important priorities. So maybe it is paid internships. Um, and that's what we want to move forward because we know that employers aren't biting with apprenticeships, so they need shorter but structured things. Um, so I know I'm not sure that there's a good answer to like what is the best one
Right,
to
right.
push, but I don't know that, well, I know this administration is pushing apprenticeships, but I just don't know that that is the answer
Sure,
right
sure.
now.
Well, and apprenticeships, I think, automatically get attached to organized labor in a lot, as
Yes.
particularly in manufacturing and construction,
Yep.
which, there's many companies that I think would say that's a great thing. But that leads to a different question. As you're thinking about different strategies for learn and earn opportunities, within Workforce Pal, there were a lot of conversations about what is a quality short-term credential? How do you define quality? Did anything come up relative to how employers are defining what a quality shorter term program would look like and what they're looking for at to benchmark learn and earn?
For quality, they were honestly, it had to be industry recognized, and that term is so.
That's a whole nother question, right? So
That
what
is
does
another
that mean?
question because, and people always ask me like, what does industry say is industry recognized? They're always gonna first land on what is the national
Yeah,
um or state trade association pointing towards for those conversations, and then if that is not happening, and I know Ohio is very similar to Michigan in the fact that like regionality is extremely important too. So there is an importance in just like how much can we vet industry recognized regionally, but with small and mid-sized employers, as much as will come to the table for that
yep,
conversation. Because while I think it's important for all of them to be aware of it, not all of them are going to actually come to the table to do it. So,
right, right. Definitely a point for those of you from Ohio on the call. I think that's something that we need to keep having more conversations about. What does quality look like? What is, just because something's regionally in demand, what does that really mean from a validated, recognized, portable credential for workers? So that kind of that balance, which
yeah.
I'm sure is something that you all will be continuing to talk about.
Yeah. Well, on that note, though, not that this is the example, and you guys might already do this in Ohio, so tell me that I'm wrong, but I often like point to Alabama as this like they do regional credentialing, and then on if something bubbles up across two region as being a priority, it becomes a state
Interesting.
priority. So just like think, are there more context of that kind of thing happening
Right.
of like, okay, so two regions have seen this is important. Does that elevate it to a different status of at the state
Interesting.
level? So
It's something to think about. And actually, Jessica, I was expecting a question from you. Jessica works for Manufacturing Works, and they are an intermediary entity in the
yeah.
Cleveland area, and they offer apprenticeship supports to businesses to make it easier for businesses. So she's asking, and Jessica, hopefully I articulated that correctly, but she's asking if you can provide some examples of why employers indicated they don't want to access intermediaries for help with apprenticeship because they've found some value there, particularly
If
for
I
youth
said that,
and underemployed.
if I said that, then I definitely misstated it because it was. both in these conversations and then in our new promise of work conversations, intermediaries have actually bubbled up to be like extremely important. So my apologies if I said something like they weren't important. They are actually extremely important because of capacity issues that I can kind of alluded to like several times is that employers just do not have the capacity to be like taking time to do some of that data and paperwork things. And also like if we want the voices of smaller, very small businesses at the table, then just thinking of like those strategies around industry sector partnerships or intermediaries that bring those voices together,
Hmm.
so that there is more, so that the employer doesn't feel like they have to be vetting every single thing, but they can have some kind of co-creation status of the apprenticeship programs or the credentials that are being created. So stay tuned because I think Amanda and I are thinking about like how we, and I actually think it was thinking of Ohio as an show more examples of how intermediaries in action are really important things to invest in.
Absolutely. Would love to have that conversation. There's certainly some great examples here. Maddie, I'm going to get to your question, but by way of follow-up to Jessica's question, so we talk about how to provide that support to intermediaries, and lots of the intermediaries doing apprenticeship support are business organizations. What is the equivalent on the worker side? That's, looking out for what the workers need in apprenticeship or learn and earn. Maybe there's not an answer for that. Maybe that's sort of a what to be
Yeah.
thinking about next, because I think, um, yeah, that there's a balance needed there between what businesses need and what workers need, as evidenced in your worker
Yes.
voice.
Yeah. And it also makes me think, this is not maybe the answer to that question, but it elevated something. I was just talking to one of my friends in Arkansas who works with energy companies. And she said that she often uses the JFF job quality framework for job quality for employers, but also for workers, so they understand the terminology to be using
Mm.
to better advocate for themselves when they want certain things out of an employer. So that they can also be interviewing the employer at the same time they're getting interviewed, so that they understand that it's a good fit for them. So I thought that was just an interesting model
Yeah,
of like offering those types of things to workers so that they can be at the same, not the same, but have a little bit more power in the conversation
absolutely.
too.
I love that. Yeah, and I love that those examples came from Alabama and Arkansas. Like, who would have thought?
I know, I know.
Maddie, I know you had your hand up. If you want to come off mute and ask a question, would love to hear from you. Others, please feel free to drop questions in the chat. Jessica, if there's a follow-up to what you were asking, feel free to jump in as well. Otherwise, I can certainly keep coming up with questions. Jenna, I can't believe you don't have something
Come
to
on,
ask
Jenna.
about.
Hey, I wouldn't say that I have a question necessarily, but just wanted to say hi from Colorado. I somehow got on Ohio's email threads after like signing up for a webinar um, that y'all offered. And so thank you for letting me be here. I just wanted to plug so I looked up Ohio is a state apprenticeship agency. And so I know, like, totally agree with you that apprenticeship is not the right play for every employer. But with Ohio being a state apprenticeship agency, they likely have more resources for employers to think through what that looks like for them. And then also in Colorado, what we've started doing is um, we have a qualified intermediary
Mm.
system where intermediaries are recognized as talent intermediaries or industry intermediaries or
Oh.
both. And
Hmm.
then our state
Hmm.
apprenticeship agency offers both of all of the qualified intermediaries training and resources on how to talk to businesses in their local areas and career seekers. So just wanted to throw
I
that out
love
there and
that.
say
I
thank
do
you for
too.
letting me be here.
Thank you for jumping on. I am glad that you weighed in, and there's lots of great work happening all the time. I feel like we're always hearing of cool stuff happening in Colorado.
Always.
I love the idea of just accepting that there's intermediaries on both sides, and that,
Hmm.
sometimes the traditional membership or business associations are the right partner for part of the equation, and you need other partners for other parts of the challenge. So thank you for sharing, Maddie.
Yeah, and there's something to be said about like how are I do love the idea of two separate or like that are also working intertwined together because of this conversation around can an intermediary and maybe some of people on this call can do both of like can they be producing and helping produce the talent and be supporting the employers, and I guess if you have enough capacity and there's investment in intermediaries you should be able to be doing both, but if there's the opportunity to have like two separate dialogues that are also intertwined, I think that's probably helpful as well.
Thank you for raising that. Yeah, identifying what a quality intermediary looks like, and then what kind of resources they need, and investments might not just be those direct to training investments. You have to support all of the work around the training investment. So that's helpful. I want to shift gears a little bit. You talked about partnering with community colleges. I know you have a background in CTE. Have you seen any, particularly exciting things where training institutions are partnering, where maybe colleges across the state are working more closely together? Ohio has a very decentralized community college system. We also have adult career centers that are very community based, but would love to see or know of examples where you're really seeing those institutions coming together for learn and earn strategy development.
I'm thinking because there's probably a lot of good examples. My state also very decentralized. Hmm. There's a lot of, well, I mean, I hate to point to Alabama again, but it's largely just how they've structured some things that have worked a
Mhm.
little bit more effectively for them. So, and this is in my head because I've been talking to healthcare providers, but like some of the healthcare work that was around apprenticeship building in the state of
Mm,
Alabama was it really important because healthcare op it has notoriously not been in that space, and it's actually very tricky, and you guys probably know this better than other people to be able to do that work. So they just structured their statewide system to be more workforce and education focused, which aligned things. And I now that actually reminded me of another state that none of us are gonna really love that I'm bringing up, but Indiana. Um, the one thing because I can't like them too much that I like about Indiana is that the state framework they use for their high wage in demand jobs is used across categories of things. So like CTE uses the same list that Workforce Board list uses that the community college list uses, and because the state has one community college system, it does help a little bit more to have like an ability to have curriculum development happening like at a very centralized Ivy Tech, but then also be regional to the approaches that are needed. So probably a hard example to replicate in other states because of the type of infrastructure that they have, but the framework of using a very similar list helps with more alignment across programs too.
I actually just learned this morning that Ivy Tech is providing some articulation for a specific apprenticeship program in Ohio. So there's
Wow.
something to it there where that's working for them. So luckily they're also a SkillSpan partner, so I can reach out to Aaron and learn no, more about that work. So if folks have any other questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat. I want to give Jeran an opportunity to share any last thoughts. We will follow up. Looks like, let me see. Okay, Jenna shared a comment, but we'll give you the last minute or so here, Jeran, and I hope everyone, if you didn't get your questions in, shoot them to me in the chat or email, and we'll follow up.
Yeah, and definitely feel free to reach out to me, whatever. I'm pretty good at responding to emails, so I can probably get things back in 24 hours. Jenna did bring up something that I actually want to uplift because it's come up in some of the conversations on our new promise of work with industry is that often what happens for industry because the pace of business is much faster than maybe education and workforce just because of accreditation and all of the things that the rules that we're governed by is that an associate's degree is great. And sometimes it would be great if some things were like more modular. So like I could say the skills that I need to upskill my workers are skills like module 1 and module 4. Um, so like the the more ability to get to maybe a competency based place of like being able to suit the needs of industry by not ju by us both allowing still for the associate's degrees and the credentials, but being able to pull pieces of that to mirror the needs of industry to work at a faster pace. Not sure how that happens. And if people have advice for me to like think through that and want to talk with me through it, Rebecca and other folks on this call, please do it because I've been thinking about what this means for a policy agenda as we go into this new promise of work conversation.
Yep.
So yes, so that has been something that's been brought up, intermediaries, that, and then I don't know how this lands with folks, but national licensures has come up as like another category of things, not just in healthcare, but like, which is obviously one that it comes up more often in, but like teaching also comes up in energy, electricians. It's coming up more often in all of these data centers being put up.
Yep.
Just like more of these opportunities that we think we really we love local control in Michigan. And I understand why those things are important at a state, having states to control things and locals to control things. But sometimes because the workers move across states, because they move in industry, the more times that there's those national licensure conversations, that's come up too.
Yep. I love that. And actually, for those of you who are coalition members, we talked about how we might continue this conversation next month. Next month, the Ohio Workforce Coalition is hosting Nick Beadle for a member-focused conversation about state policy. This is the second of our 4 sessions with him this year. And I think this question of what does policy mean for developing stronger learn and earn conversations or opportunities could be a really good conversation for next month. So we can circle back offline. And yes, we know local control well in Ohio, and there's a lot to say about that. So we
Yes.
will wrap it up here, knowing that hopefully we'll have another conversation. Thank you all very much for joining today. As I mentioned, next month we do have our second of 2 sessions with Nick Beadle, National Workforce Policy expert, former DOL Assistant Chief of Staff and attorney who has been doing a lot of talk nationally around where we're at with workforce right now. So come back next month to see us then. Jeran, thank you so much for your time and this really important research. Looking forward to being able to learn more from it and keep the conversation going.
Thank you guys. Appreciate being on the call with you.
Take care.
Thank
Bye.
you.